Well, welcome everyone. What an honor it is to be with all of you on this mid-July evening. Before we officially begin, I want to just talk about some Zoom etiquette here. So first off, we are recording this conversation, so don't say anything that you don't want to be heard later. Please make sure that you are muted at all times unless you are speaking, and so I think David will be in charge of that. And if you're comfortable, feel free to keep your camera on. It's nice to see who's in the room, as they say. And so those buttons can be found at the bottom of the screen. But if you're having technical difficulties, message, I guess we're messaging just everyone at this point. So message in the chat. And David Fox Estrin, our wonderful tech expert for the evening, will help get that sorted. And additionally, we'd love to see who's here. So take a minute to type your name, where you're calling in from, and how you heard about this event using the chat function, which also can be found at the bottom of the screen. And as more people are trickling in, I want to take a minute to thank a few people who really helped to make tonight possible. First off, we wouldn't be here without Agnes and Lewis, who you'll hear more about in just a few minutes. So sincere gratitude to both of you for being here, for being so open and willing to share your stories and perspectives with us. I also want to thank Keel Majewski, a dear friend and a personal mentor of mine, in addition to being a consultant for the foundation, for offering to moderate and to help with the behind-the-scenes logistics for this evening. Keel is a public historian who is passionate about helping eyewitnesses of genocides transfer their legacies to future generations. For 10 years, Keel was the first executive director of Candle's Holocaust Museum and Education Center. Keel has curated exhibits, led tours of genocide memorials in North America, Europe, and Africa, and has mentored youth and adult peace-building advocates. He writes and speaks regularly on topics such as the Holocaust, Rwanda, polarization and radicalization, documenting history, fostering dialogue, and civic engagement. Thank you, Keel. I also want to thank David Fox Estrin, founder and CEO of Together We Remember, for handling all things Zoom. Again, if you have any technical issues throughout the evening, just send a message in the chat and we'll do our best to get that sorted. I also want to thank Danny Spungen for connecting so many of us to this world of Holocaust and genocide education. And I want to give a huge thank you to Mara Lauren and Jake Spungen for really stepping up to make this evening happen and for handling all things social media. And finally, I want to thank all of you guys for being here. These conversations are more important than ever, so I'm glad we're all here together. But let me take a step back. I know many of you are probably wondering, what is this? Who's organizing this? So this event is being put on by the next generation of the Florence and Laurence Spungen Family Foundation. Our foundation was founded in 2006 by my grandparents, Florence and Laurence Spungen. Our mission focuses on improving the quality of life of individuals and families facing health challenges and to address issues that particularly affect the Jewish community. One of our strategic focus areas is on Holocaust and genocide education, which many of us in the next generation have become particularly interested. When we realized we wouldn't be able to meet in person this year, we decided to get creative and host an event with our dear friends Lewis and Agnes to continue the dialogue virtually. For more information about our foundation, feel free to check out our website at spungenfoundation.org, and I can post that in the chat a little bit later. But now that we have all of the housekeeping taken care of, I want to name that this has been a challenging time for many of us. Within the past month, we've lost quite a few people in our extended communities, some to COVID, some to old age, and some to accidents. I'd like to take a minute to reflect and honor the lives of our loved ones who are no longer here. Agnes's best friend, Magda Brown, who was also a Holocaust survivor and educator, passed away last week. And Lewis has lost 4 important people in his life this past month: Demetric Porter Jr., Jesse Lee, Loana Depp, and Karib Baker. As we say in the Jewish tradition, may their memory be for a blessing. Let's take a moment of silence to honor their legacies and anyone else that you might be carrying today. Thank you all for that. Now we'll have Keel introduce our lovely speakers, Agnes and Lewis. Keel, take it away.
Well, thank you, Melissa, and it's a real honor to be working with you and the foundation. Want to give a shout out to all the Spungen Foundation Next Gen members by name. So Melissa, Mara, Jake, Josh, Jenna, Jonathan, Tali, Eric, Alex, Abby, Leanna, and Elliot. Really happy to be working with you all. Thanks for putting this event together. Hat tip to my guy, David Fox Estrin, for keeping the back of the house running. And to introduce our speakers, I think that most of you have read the bios on the flyer. So I'm not going to repeat those bios. Instead, I just want to introduce them by how I got to know them. And starting with you, Agnes. So Agnes Schwartz is a Holocaust survivor from Budapest, Hungary. And she'll tell you more about her story of survival in just a moment. But Agnes, I remember the first time I met you, it was at an event at the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and you were with, of course, Magda Brown. In fact, you were introduced to me as Magda's best friend. And since then, Agnes has been to my hometown of Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm actually calling in from Madison, Wisconsin right now, but I'm from Terre Haute. And Agnes has been to my hometown. She's gotten to know my mother and father. And I've had the pleasure of seeing how skilled she is at making connections with young people, taking her whole complicated and painful history and being able to relate with young people in several dimensions. Agnes, it's been wonderful for me to watch because having worked with a lot of young people, I know how much they struggle emotionally and psychologically to make their way in this world, even when they come from a solid, average background. So I want to just thank you for being such a dedicated survivor, speaker, and educator and mentor of young people. Lewis Lee, I met in 2018 through his role as the Milwaukee Portal Curator for Shared Studios. Lewis will definitely want to hear more about the hashtag Portal Life, as you call it, but suffice it to say, I was working on a genocide commemoration through this global network of portals. And the one I visited was in Lewis's backyard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right in the heart of 53206, the Amani neighborhood, which has this reputation as one of the most heavily incarcerated zip codes per capita in the country. And right around that time, David and I visited the Legacy Museum and National Memorial to Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, this new memorial dedicated to the victims of racial terror lynching. And that's where I learned in a clear-cut way the evolution of racial subordination from slavery to lynching to mass incarceration. And thinking back on my experience talking to Lewis just 1 or 2 months before my visit to Alabama, I realized that mass incarceration is a legacy of mass atrocity in this country, which has not been sufficiently acknowledged or addressed. And Lewis's life, folks in Lewis's community have been shaped in part by those effects. But getting to know Lewis and his colleague, Dennis Walton, has really been eye-opening and enlightening. And I admire the incredible work they're doing on behalf of their community and especially the youth. So what did we eventually do? Danny Spungen and I took Agnes Schwartz to the portal in Milwaukee at Lewis's house. They made a great connection. And that's how we got to this panel here today. So I've got a ton of questions. The way this will work is for the first half hour or so, I'm gonna ask Agnes first and then Lewis to tell us more of their autobiographical sketch, maybe 10 or 15 minutes apiece. So we'll get through the first half hour that way. Then in the second half hour, I will lead them through a Q&A of questions that I've drafted. The third Q&A will be wide open for all of you to type your messages into the chat bar, and we'll just take it as it comes. And I know Agnes, I know Lewis, and they both are open books, willing to answer the tough questions you may want to bring. We consider this a safe and open space. Nobody has to be perfect, and this is an era where we really need this dialogue and need to be able to talk to each other and ask our questions. So I would encourage all of us to do that. So first, Agnes, please give us a sense of how you got to where you are today. What have you seen? Where have you been? What do you do? Maybe
And
give
I first thank you for this program and thank Melissa for putting it together. And all of you who are willing participants in this program. And of course, knowing Louis Lee has been my pleasure. I had a wonderful visit with him in Madison and again at Danny's house. And he's always welcome in my home. Okay, I have to make my story very short to accommodate the time span. So if I skip over things and you're curious about them, just ask me later on. As Kiel said, I was born in Budapest, Hungary, the same year Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. I was born to relatively affluent parents who wanted a child for throughout 8 years of marriage, and they finally got their little girl. I was not only an only child, but I was also an only grandchild I had grandparents on my mother's side, and my mother had a sister who was childless, so I was everybody's baby. Nobody could have had an early childhood better than the one I had. And then I knew very little about the war. My parents had a shortwave radio, but they never turned it on in front of me. And I knew there was a war going on, but I had no idea who was fighting whom. Hitler was just another name to me. I got ready to go to school, and my mother started telling me before I even started that I had to do very well in school, because there was a law called numerus clausus, whereby only 1% of college kids could be Jews. Otherwise, you could not get in. My mother had my mother had two more sisters who had immigrated to Chicago long before I was born. And her older sister was Ethel, who was a physician, and I think my mom really wanted me to walk in her footsteps. I felt no anti-Semitism in the first 4 years of schooling, and that's the way the school system was set up there. You went to school for 4 years, and then depended on your grades, whether you could go on to college preparatory school of 8 years, or if your grades were only so-so, you went to a Polgari, which was 4 years of a trade school. And my tears rolled down my mother's cheeks as we looked at the list that was posted on the door. And yes, I made it now. I was going to the Jewish gymnasium. And by this time, the Allies were bombing, mostly in the dark of night. The air raid sirens would go off, and we'd all grab some clothes and run for the basement. And this became so routine that next morning, I got up, my parents got up, they got dressed, I got dressed, I went off to school, and they went off to work. We also had a living housekeeper because my mother worked with my father in the store. They operated a store whereby they sold yard goods to tailors who made custom-made suits. So they were both always beautifully, beautifully dressed as the tailors made their clothes. My aunt Elsa, my mother's sister in Budapest, made all my clothes. She was a wonderful seamstress. And Grandma and Grandpa lived in a small town called Rakosliget, and I spent many, many beautiful summer days with them, and sometimes stayed for quite a while during the summer. And I loved every minute of it. Grandma and Grandpa, well, they doted on me, and Grandma was a great cook, and her yard was filled with fruit trees. The aroma was absolutely delicious. All this went on until March 1944, and that's when the Germany, as a last-ditch effort, because they knew already they were losing the war, decided to invade Hungary. And all our lives drastically changed at that point. We all had to wear a yellow star. My parents must have heard of some atrocities in the outlying areas because they moved Grandma and Grandpa in with us because they felt that nothing like that could happen in the big city. I had to stop going to school. My parents couldn't go to work, and we couldn't go to the grocery store. Does it remind you of the COVID? It reminds me of it. Um, During the war, our wonderful housekeeper hid me at her home as her Catholic niece. My father was deported first, and then he came back, and then my mother was taken. I was 11 years old. And there she stood in front of me saying goodbye to me and trying to put a smile on her face. And she said, "Be a good girl, listen to grandma, and I'll see you soon." Unfortunately, this is the last time I ever saw her. She was never able to come back. After Julia, our housekeeper, took me home with her, the ghetto was formed, and the Jews remaining in the Yellow Star homes were now forced into the ghetto, where food was even more scarce and sanitation was terribly poor and people were dying. The war was virtually over, but the Hungarian Nazi Party, the Arrow Cross, it wasn't fast enough for them, and they marched a handful of Jews down to the Danube nightly and wired them together, and with one shot they sank to the bottom of the river. And that was the fate of my grandmother and my uncle and aunt, decent, law-abiding citizens whose only sin was having been born Jewish. My father survived in a Swedish protected home. There was a Swedish diplomat called Raoul Wallenberg who was instructed to buy up all the apartment buildings he was able. And he handed out papers. Some were good, some were fake, but whatever. And I have no idea how my father got in there, but that's how he survived. And I survived. Well, I lived in a basement for November through the middle of January, when the Russians got the Nazis out and freed Budapest. And after my father and I discovered that we were the only two left, that my mother wasn't coming back, she died in Bergen-Belsen. We made plans to immigrate to the American relatives, and we got on a propeller plane on January 1947 and flew over the Atlantic to New York. One of my uncles, my mother's younger sister's husband, a CPA, came and met us in New York, and now I met my new family in Chicago. All my cousins were boys, so my father told me that I would be the princess. Since all my cousins are boys, I'm the only girl. And that really didn't work out that way, because since I was the only girl, I was the one who was asked to set the table and wash the dishes. I was asked nothing that I didn't ask of my own children, but I came from a very different world, and this was all a shock to me. I got married very young, right out of high school, because I was so unhappy. And actually, I had a scholarship waiting for me at Mount Sinai Hospital's nursing school, which I turned down, because there was a boy who liked me, and he liked me so much that he asked me to marry him. And this was after 4 years or so of everybody telling me that I was too fat because I overate to fill the hole in my heart, and that nobody would love me because I got too fat. So the first boy who came along swept me off my feet, and I married him. We had 3 children, and now I had my family. This was my family. Unfortunately, as you will perhaps hear later, or if you read my book, you will find out after 15 years, the marriage failed, and I ended up having to go to work, and I raised my 3 children, who eventually gave me 3 grandchildren. And as of today, I have 4 great-grandchildren, 2 in Denver, Colorado, and 2 in Orlando, Florida. My love for all my children kept me going through very many hardships, and I can elaborate on that later if you like. And I give you back the microphone, Keel. I did write my memoir, and so if you want to know more about my life, please feel free. It's called a Roll Up the Dice, and Melissa will tell you more about that.
Yeah, Melissa, do you want to mention that now or wait until the end of the call?
Sure, we can do that now. So if anybody wants to buy a signed copy of the book, they are $15 each. And if you want Agnes to sign it addressed to you, what I'll have you do is just write your name in the chat and say, I'd like a book. And then whoever you'd like the book addressed to. And then I'll also have you email me at melissa@spungenfoundation.org. And here I can write that in the chat. So I'll have you email me your name, your address, and then we can talk about payment. We can accept Venmo, and I can include my Venmo handle there, or you can send a check. And if you want to do that, we'll email back and forth and we'll get that sorted. We would like to have you do that. Let us know by the end of the day tomorrow. And if you want it signed specifically to you, we'd need to know by the end of the call today. So any questions, just let us know. But it's a great book and $15.
Yes.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Agnes. I know it's not easy to compress your story into 10 or 15 minutes, and we could spend the whole hour and a half talking with just you. But what I love through your experience comes a lot of wisdom and insight, and we'll explore that in the questions too. I just wanted to ask you one quick follow-up question, Agnes. Your best friend Magda, we all loved her, but you loved her among the most of anybody on this earth, and so I just wanted to offer you the opportunity to say a couple words if you have any memories about Magda or anything you'd like to say in her memory.
Do you know that there is a memorial in Germany for her this evening, the same time we're doing this program? And
Yeah.
I wish we could have at Weimar. And to say that I will miss her is the understatement. She's the one I called when I was sad or when I was glad. And we shared anything and everything. And there was a little girl who came from Miskolc, Hungary, who really made a name for herself in the Holocaust circuit because she was willing to talk from hospital beds anytime, any place, anywhere. And that became a mission in her life. Holocaust education became a mission in her life, and she deserves all the honor we can give her.
Yeah.
The whole world can give her.
Yes, well, thank you for that, Agnes. And for those of you on the call who don't know, Magda Braun was an amazing force of nature, Holocaust survivor, survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the Allendorf subcamp of Buchenwald. And that's why she's being memorialized in Germany right now as a talk about a scheduling conflict, but we can share the link perhaps to that event later. So thank you for remembering her, Agnes. And Magda just passed away last week at the age of 93. Another person on our panel here who met Magda Braun is our man Louis Lee in Milwaukee. So Louis, do you want to come off of mute and tell us where you've come from and your biographical sketch here?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thanks for allowing me to be here and participate in just such a great discussion and conversation. It's always a pleasure to see Agnes and Kiel and Dave and Danny and so many others I got to meet during my journeys of just being able to meet people all over the world and connect, doing activism. Kind of tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Louis Lee. I live in Milwaukee. I'm a part of the Money 53206 community, which unfortunately it has its title known as the most incarcerated community in the United States. Originally from Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I moved to Milwaukee when I was 9 years old, the witness protection program, because my mother was assaulted by gang leaders. So we had to move from Milwaukee to Chicago, which is kind of how I landed in Milwaukee. Well, I moved to Milwaukee when I was 9 in the Federal Witness Protection Program. My mother was assaulted by gang leaders on the south side of Chicago, so the feds felt the need to move us to a different city. Can you guys hear me? So I kind of grew up in Chicago, between Chicago and Milwaukee. And one of the places I moved to first was Milwaukee, which is the 53206 zip code. And, I'm kind of a person who had run-ins with the law when I was younger, between the ages of 25 and 26, resulted into me going to prison and eventually joining gangs. However, I was able to kind of set myself free through the power of volunteering. When I got out of prison, it was kind of hard for me to find employment. So the only way I could kind of even gain a little sanity about myself was volunteering. And some of the things I used to do was like, neighborhood cleanups, just kind of helping the elderly in my neighborhood, kind of volunteering with the young people in my neighborhood, educating them on gangs and ways to avoid life in prison, leading to me becoming a mentor, leading to me also kind of winning an award from the mayor, which led to my first ever job and first ever, I kind of like to say, history-making moment where I became the first convicted felon to ever work for the mayor's administration. He actually made me the outreach coordinator for the Milwaukee Fatherhood Initiative, which was a part of his initiative that specialized in getting young people and young men to kind of get together and band under the name of fatherhood and build relationships. In the African American community that I live in, it's like a gap between young people and their fathers due to the high incarceration rates. So one of the things I became passionate about was kind of uniting young men with their fathers and actually finding father figures for young people who don't have fathers to kind of stir them from life in prison and things like that. Like I said, I'm a person that kind of walk in faith. So volunteering led into so many other things. One of the things that kind of led into was portals and me actually becoming a part of an award-winning documentary called Milwaukee 53206, which showcases life in the most incarcerated zip code, what it's like to be a young person growing up in a place with high incarceration rates, where it's like kind of, how can I say, bad blood between the community and law enforcement. The movie actually documents that, and I was able to be a part of that. And that kind of led me into the portals technology to where that kind of changed my life because it enabled me for the first time in my life to kind of travel and see the country. I never ever got to leave out of my neighborhood due to several things, not having enough money, things like that. As you can see, the picture just popped up. And this became my sacred, this gold shipping container you see. Some great moments with me, Agnes. It kind of brings a smile on my face, and this is where it changed my life. This machine allowing me to learn about the world, meet people, and find friends all over the world, and actually educate me, myself, and so many people in my community on culture, and actually being able to chip away at, how can I say, racism and discrimination by learning what we don't know about different countries and different cultures. Me being an ex-gang member, like I said, I never thought I'd even get to leave out my community. So to have a shipping container take me from being in the most incarcerated zip codes, different places around the country, kind of leading to motivational speaking. It led me into meeting the Obamas, where I got to have a dinner with the Obamas. Just a lot of things that were surreal to me because I never thought I could go from, how can I say, a gang member to like global philanthropist, I like to say. And I like to, and I believe you can do so much in the power of volunteering. And along my journey, I got to meet so many great people like Agnes and Kill and David and so many others, which led me to learn more about the Holocaust. I only knew bits and pieces about the Holocaust growing up, because unfortunately in my neighborhood, we were taught that most Jewish people don't like African American people. So to actually meet people with Jewish backgrounds and learn totally different and learn about their struggles and their stories and how much we do share and how much we do have alike, I was forever changed. Not ever been now, how can I say, a follower and trying to educate myself more about the Holocaust and the survivors of the Holocaust. And just finding out is so much like, in a way, like the African American history, where we were enslaved and persecuted. It really changed me in an amazing way. And I like to view people like Agnes and Magna, for instance. Last time I got to see her was at Danny's house, and I could just remember thinking how much of a jewels it was to kind of be around them, because I view them as like being able to go through a time machine, go back into the past and really see what it's like and have a living testimony on just strength and overcoming. And so I've been kind of taking their love and their motivation with me when I go to places and back to my community and enlightening people on just what it's like to be different, but how we're the same. And using Portal's technology has allowed me to do that. And to be short, because I know we're running short on time, I'll tell you a little bit about Portal's technology. Portals is just a gold shipping container where we got immersive audio-visual technology inside, where you walk in it and it makes you feel like you're standing in the same room as another person that's halfway across the world. So it makes for a more intimate connection. It's full body, it's live, it's immersive. And to me, I felt like we were at the beginning of, how can I say, bridging the gap and finally starting a global community where it's not even about race or background or religion. It's just about being under the flag of just human beings. So with that being said, I would like anybody that's on the panel and anybody that's participating today, feel free to just ask whatever questions you like. My life is an open book. I'm pretty comfortable. I know it's a lot of things I'm curious about. I know there's a lot of things people really want to ask, but they don't get to ask. So I just want you to take the time to use me and for whatever you want to ask about any issues, whether it's being African American, what it's like growing up in gangs. Like I said, I have nothing to hide. All the things that I went through in my life made me who I am today and helped me become a better me and helped me help so many others in my neighborhood. Actually, if you want to find out more about me, you can go to my website. You can go to, how can I say, the Portals Policing Project. You can go to sharedstudios.com and you can go to Louis Lee on Facebook and you can find out more about my story. And I'm going to send that back to you, Kil.
Thanks a lot, Louis. I just got to follow up real quick because not to get political, but I don't know that you can just drop in there that you had dinner with the Obamas and not explain that. So just give us a sense of how it went, how that came to be with you having dinner with the Obamas and what that was like.
Well, actually, like I said, Portals is a project that actually changed my life because it allowed me to kind of be myself and tell my story to the world. And people started to look at me more than just a person who had been in gangs or a person who had been incarcerated. They started to see that I was a person of change, a person that really wanted to make a difference in this neighborhood, who had made mistakes, and who had the power to reach people that other people perhaps couldn't reach. So Portals kind of led to me taking a trip to New York, where I had became the Times Square curator, and it was like the biggest moment of my life because I had never been to New York, and being in Times Square, and it's your first time in New York, and you're from the inner city of Chicago, it's like surreal. You're like, wow, like lights, camera, action. I'm like right there in the middle of Times Square. I never had so much press or so many celebrities and cameras. So to me, it was like the ultimate gift. It was like I had made it in my own eyes. And it inspired me and so many others in my neighborhood that I was just in Times Square, ex-gamer in Times Square doing something on a global scale, really inspired people and got them riled up in the neighborhood. So while I was there, Amar Bashi, who's the creator of Portals, knew I was from the city of Chicago and knew I had a lot of ties with the south side of Chicago, being in gangs, and then becoming a mentor of kids and young boys on the south side of Chicago as well as in Milwaukee. He had the opportunity to meet Obama, and at this time, President Obama was building a national library that he has in Chicago that's about to open. I don't know if it's open now, but I know it's about to open. And he asked me did I want to come meet the president. And, you know, I'm thinking like, get out of here. This is not really happening. How often do you get to meet the president? I'm thinking he's doing a little bit too much. I'm already in Times Square. So he's going to top Times Square and take me to meet the Obamas. I'm thinking like, no. Lo and behold, he told me to drop everything I was doing. And was like, I even remember the day, November 11th, 2017. And he asked me to just kind of drop everything I was doing. They went and bought me like some fresh duds, nice suit, like a $500 suit. I'm thinking like smoking duds. They catered me to the airport. I got right on the airplane. 2 hours later, I'm in Chicago. And what made it, I think the highlight of the moment for me, just coming from where I come from, the inner city, was the limo ride and kind of like the police escorts, and getting in the back and getting ushered to the center. And lo and behold, I meet Omar. I got these fresh duds on. I'm nervous. I still can't believe it until I believe it, until I really see it. And so I walk through the door, and lo and behold, it's Michelle. It's Obama. And it's like I'm on a TV show. It's not happening. It's a chef. It's Condoleezza Rice. It's like just something out of a movie. And I wanted to cry. I wanted to smile. I wanted to do so many things. And that's the only thing I could think of at that moment, because me and my mom is so close. I called my mom, and I knew this would just be a grand moment for her. And I just told her, Mom, I think I made it. I met the president. And there you have it, you know, just one of the happiest moments in my life.
That's really great. I appreciate that, Louis. I'm glad your mom got to share in that a little bit with you.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to pause for reaction, Agnes, because Danny sent a message. I know Danny's right there with you, and he said you were listening pretty intensely. And I wondered if right off the bat you had any questions or reactions or things for Louis that you might wanted to say here.
I am very impressed by Louis and what he has accomplished in his life. And I think he's really a wonderful guy and a wonderful model for young Black men who are treated so badly so often.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate that, Agnes. So let's get into this, and let's talk about mental health, because Agnes, this was a part of your story that you referred to. Louis, I know this.
First of all, I left out that a year after, when my father and I got here, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he was sent away to a sanitarium. And almost immediately after we arrived, I'm in a strange country with strange people, with strange language. And you can imagine how difficult it was. And then my father is shipped off to a sanitarium. About a year later, when I was already graduating from grammar school, the 8th grade here, he was released, negative, and now I thought my daddy was coming home and making a life for me. And to the contrary, he said he couldn't assimilate, he couldn't learn the language, and he wanted to go back to Hungary. And so he did, and well, you know, every child is entitled to the unconditional love of parents, and that's what I lost. I was in people's home who said they loved me, but these are not the people I grew up with. Could I trust them? And I never did trust them that they truly loved me. So this is why my always difficult teen age lives became so difficult for me. So I married Danny right after I turned 18, graduated high school. He was 4 years older than I was. And we established a family, and life was good. He never made good money, but I had my 3 children and a loving husband, and that was enough for me. And I felt the rest was going to come in time. And after about 13 years, he started to say very strange things. And the first thing I remember is that he told me that the phones at work were bugged and I should be careful what I say. And to make a very long story short, Eventually, he threatened to commit suicide, and that's when I got him to Michael Reese Hospital, where he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. And the doctors there told me that his illness could be acute and could pass in a short time, or it could become chronic. Well, his illness became chronic. I struggled for 2 years with him in and out of the hospital. They pumped him full of medication and then sent him home. And one of the symptoms of this illness is that the patient will not take the medication, and immediately he slid back. And there I was, a little girl who graduated high school and had no training to do anything. And the Jewish Federation wanted to send me to college, and I said, I don't have the time for that. I have to feed the 3 kids and put a roof over our heads. So I went to business college for a year, and they paid for my tuition, my books, even my transportation. And after that, thank God, I never had to take a penny from anybody. I managed to raise my kids on a secretary's salary. I found out that legal secretaries made better wages than others, so I opted to get a job in a law office. And I really made a career for myself managing law offices, and the last job I was on was 17 years. Now, the mental illness, well, mental illness is a very cruel disease, because had my husband been ill with pneumonia or cancer or tuberculosis, I would have never thought of leaving him. So the guilt fell on me that I am leaving a sick man, but I felt that if I couldn't help him, then I had to get my children into a more quiet atmosphere. And through the years, I sometimes worked 2 jobs. You know, it's a very unfair society. And I could go on talking about mental illness for hours and hours, because that's my second soapbox forum. But nobody cares about the family of the sick person. The sick person, unless they harm you or they harm themselves, you can't call the police. Just the sick person is not forced to take medication, because that would be against his free will, and his constitutional rights would be violated. And what about the family's constitutional right to live a peaceful life? So these are the issues I cope with mental illness, and that has been a very important platform for me ever since, because some very major changes need to be made in that field. Danny was committed to Kankakee Hospital several times after Michael Reese wouldn't take him, because they only handled acute cases. And each time he came home, the same merry-go-round happened. And well, my daughter was out of college and getting married when I got a phone call at work that Danny died. This was 15 years afterwards. And I never realized how deeply I loved him, because even after all that time, I was so heartbroken. He was walking down a dark highway and the semi hit him. And to this day, I don't know if he purposely committed suicide or he just didn't know what he was doing and running away because he thought the government was spying on him. And so the truck accidentally hit him. So you wanted to know about mental illness, Keel, so that's my short version of that. I also write about that in my book.
Yeah, and I can only imagine what a burden that was for you and your family, Agnes. And so I think—
I realized the guilt trip that put on me first I felt guilty for surviving when so many people died during the Holocaust. And then I felt guilty for leaving a sick man. So that was very good. I had a lot of therapy after that. And that's where I began to put the pieces together and help me go forward with my life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for going into that for us, Agnes. And Louis, I want to ask you your thoughts as well on mental health, because you know, some of the things that you could have gone into more in your biographical story is gun violence. And I know that Louis, your brother, was a victim of homicide via gun, and being in prison, so much trauma. Can you talk to us, Louis, about how you have coped, how you have dealt with your own mental health, and how you approach healing?
Well, growing up, and mainly like I'm the oldest of five, and kind of growing up in like a neighborhood like a money, you see a lot of things that kind of mess with your mental. That goes on daily, like things like just simple encounters with the law enforcement, the way they talk to you, the way they would treat us, other mental things that you started to notice growing up in a neighborhood like mine is how your neighborhood is kind of predominantly one race, but we don't own anything. We don't own anything in the neighborhood. Can't afford to buy homes. We can't afford to do things like that. And to top all that out, you do have the difficulties of going through a lot of gun violence, drug abuse, so many things that kind of plague the inner city that kind of deal with your mental, having parents that abuse drugs, or having siblings and how can I say, in-laws that may have drug problems or die. Like I lost my brother when I was 18 years old. He got killed in a drug house. And that forever changed me to where, how can I say, I never thought that somebody could be gone for so long and still feel like you never lose the thought of them, or like they still here. You know, it's something that you never get over. It's a long-term thing that deals with your mental health. It's like a long-term trauma. Till this day, I actually deal with the death of losing my brother at such a young age. And I overheard Agnes say something like kind of even feeling guilty kind of for what took place with his death, feeling like I'm almost to blame, you know, because I didn't actually pull the trigger or the actual person that shot him, but I always blame myself because I think he was trying to follow me. He saw me trying to get into a life of fast money and gangs, and I think he was just following his big brother. And I often don't tell people this, but deep down, I hurt. I kind of still hurt from that to this day. That's a brick that I carry on my shoulder because I always feel like if I would have been a more positive person or the person that I am today, he'll still be here. And I lost countless others to gun violence. So even recently, a lot of people in my neighborhood have been taken down by gun violence, as well as the COVID. I lost 3 family members to COVID. I actually lost my grandson in a car accident, my unborn grandson in a car accident. So these are all the traumas and mental stresses that I deal with daily, but the way I overcome them, and the only way I think I can overcome them and not think so much about them, how they ail me, honestly, is just things like this. These things are very therapeutic. Having discussions, being able to talk about it, being able to talk to other people in my neighborhood and kind of stir them away from gun violence, gang violence. That gives me strength. It gives me hope, and it makes me not think about the dark times of my own trauma. It's when I'm helping others, is how can I say, when I'm at my all-time high, when my spirit is most high. And it's the way I kind of wipe away the pain of losing my brother and so many others to gun violence, because gun violence is something that we tackle daily in this neighborhood. And just kind of, like I said, volunteering and just being able to bring hope to others and sharing the little that I have with others. Like, I'm not a rich person, but I share everything that I have, including my home. You know about me, Kill. Like, I take in children in my home. I share everything I have. The little money that I make, I split it with people in my neighborhood. These are the things that make me tackle going through so much trauma and mental health.
That's why we love you, Lewis. Thank you so much for going there for us. Really appreciate that. And Agnes, you know, you've had a couple more decades on this planet than Lewis. And I wonder if you had any reactions or thoughts to what Lewis was saying about carrying the guilt and healing, anything that...
Oh my God, that truly touched me. And I identify with that guilt. And to this day, I question how come I survived the Holocaust and so many others didn't, especially my mother. Losing my mother was the biggest loss of my life, because everything would have gone differently. My parents would have immigrated together and we would have remained to be a family. And well, I was college material and nobody wanted to send me to college. And that's why I went looking for nursing school, because I could live away from home. But then when this young man said he loves me, and after 6 weeks he asked me to marry him, I mean, I really needed that. And my self-esteem was about as low as it could get. And I really didn't regain my self-esteem until I finally found out that, yes, I could make it on my own and I could raise my children by myself. And that gave me a tremendous, tremendous boost and self-confidence, which I lacked badly.
Yeah, thanks, Agnes. Lewis, I just wanted to touch on a couple things from your particular experience and people in the Amani neighborhood. You know, I remember walking out of the restaurant called Coffee Makes You Black right around the corner from where you live. Agnes, you've been there. And there was a meeting going on about expungement and parole. And I remember as you and I walked out, there were two guys walking with us, and you three were talking about all the things that you can't do once you've been convicted of a felony. Can you tell us some of the things that, you know, people who have been incarcerated are not able to do, and what are some of the things that happen to Black people or low-income people within the so-called justice system that are totally unjust?
Well, one thing that's tough about just the justice system for just an African American person, especially, I like to say, really stress on this, me being a darker male African American person, male, is really tough because of all it's like the tricks, it's like the overplay for the underplay with the prison system with an African American person. It's like, you know, they say you're innocent until proven guilty, but why is it that when you get arrested, they kind of throw you in the county jail and they give you these outlandish bails that we know we can't afford, so we kind of guilty before we prove innocent. So it's kind of like you're just doing jail time even before you get a good defense. Not being able to get out. So what you have is, in my case, like I can speak from my own experience, a lot of times when I went to prison, I could have got out of those moments. I just didn't have the proper education or the finances to get myself out. So what I find myself doing is copping a plea. And that's sad, because that's what you have in African American people. People that can't afford to get good defenses or defend themselves. So they just take pleas, and that's how you find yourself kind of piling up for these felonies, man. That kind of disqualify you for a lot of things in life. And the crazy thing about, how can I say, things like not being able to bear arms if you're a convicted felon or you're on paper, or not being able to vote if you're in prison or on paper. And the funny thing about that, what I find so disenfranchising about it is, how is it they can count all the prisoners' bodies in their district that's in the county jails, but they don't have the right to vote? How is it that people get public defenders who's not really interested because they don't pay the bucks? You have overcrowded jails, not being able to vote. That's why right now, believe it or not, I lost a lot of hope in just the whole voting system. You know, I believe no matter who we vote for, we're always going to take a loss. I even got something that I've been kind of saying to myself, like, I think the best thing kind of right now is to be like independent, because I feel like you have Republicans, it seems like you can't trust them, and then you have Democrats, it seems like they're not doing enough. So I'm like torn in between, and I think people are disenfranchised because everything is against you to make you not be able to be a part of, how can I say, American society. So it's like, for instance, when they freed the slaves, that was a great thing, but then they outlawed everything to enslave you back. And knowing, like growing up in the neighborhood in my, like a money with so much gun violence and being a convicted felon who doesn't have the right to bear arms, that's kind of like a double-edged sword. Even protesting, like for instance, in our neighborhood, we couldn't ride around 4 deep in our cars. Automatic pullover, automatic get treated like a gang member. It's just, I don't understand why us as African American just can't get along with law enforcement. I think part of that is because law enforcement don't have any intimate connection to the people that they're actually enforcing. I actually wish that my best friend is actually running for state representative. I don't know if I told you that. And one of the reasons he's running for state representative is because he wants to actually implement change. And one of the things we wish we could implement was, say, if you could be a prosecutor or a judge, you should have to live in a district that you get to judge and prosecute. I think, how can you be an effective judge of people who commit certain crimes if you don't understand what it's like to live in circumstances? Not excusing anybody. I believe if you do something that breaks the law and is totally out of order, you should pay a penalty. But I also can't ignore how many people are being sentenced unfairly. They sentence African American different from other races. Why is it that we make up 90% of the prisons? And one of the things I hated the most and that I had to overcome the most was not being able to get employment after prison. Imagine going to prison and getting released and not being able to get a job for a certain amount of years. One of the mental stresses that I had to endure was actually facing my family and not being able to provide a good meal for them every night, a decent place to stay, all because I had made mistakes when I was a younger person. Like I said, I'm not condoning anybody saying you should get away with committing crimes, but I do believe that you can change, that you can turn your life around, and I like to view myself as a living witness to that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Louis. And you know, you mentioned the plea deals, and I just watched the documentary 13th about the loophole in the 13th Amendment that slavery is abolished except as a punishment for crime. And it said a statistic in that documentary was that 97% of all criminal charges never make it to trial because they end in plea deals. Because you may be picked up on the street for something that you didn't even do, but you're facing the risk of 15 or 30 years in jail, and you can't afford to fight it, so you take a plea deal that maybe gets you 3, and then you've got it on your record and so forth. So that's just an illustration of what you were talking about there. And I linked in the chat reports by Equal Justice Initiative, which focuses on criminal justice reform and also the legacy of racial terrorism in the United States. So there's a lot of good reports for the folks on the call this evening if you want to learn more about that. Also, we'll share some more resources with you toward the end of the call. But as we're getting into our audience Q&A, I want to go ahead and ask people, if you've got questions, go ahead and type them either into the Q&A box or into the chat bar, and we'll start handling those. But while we're waiting on those to queue up, I wanted to ask Agnes, you and Louis as well, your thoughts on how, with all of this stuff going on, this social conflict that we see, you know, protesters, COVID, like political polarization. Here we have a Jewish Holocaust survivor, born several decades on the other part of the world from you, Louis Lee, and yet I see so much commonality and resonance between you two in what you're talking about. And I wondered, from both of you, your thoughts on how people can build those bridges across cultural differences, white, black, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever. Why don't you go ahead, Louis, with your thoughts on how we can build bridges, and then Agnes, I want to hear from you too, please.
Well, personally, I think the great way to build this bridge is like things that we're doing now. Having the conversation, not being afraid to ask the questions, not being afraid to let people find out about what it's like to be African American, what it's like to be Jewish, allowing people to be brutally honest about their experiences, and educating people on what it's like, and killing the stereotypes. I think the world is so messed up because it's just a lack of the things we don't know, the things that's not knowledgeable, that we didn't have knowledge of. I can speak like for myself. I was very stereotypical until I got the portals and I got to learn about the Holocaust survivors. I got to learn about the genocide in Rwanda. I learned about refugees in early Iraq and being able to communicate to the world and understand that even though we're in different places and we sound like different stories, we all still kind of still share the same trauma, the same pain. Gun violence is gun violence no matter what part of the world you're in. Losing a loved one affects everyone, no matter what situation it is. And I think once we start to identify that we're just human beings and we have so much in common, then you start to forget about race. We even made up a saying in our community about portal life, for example. Portal life is just being a part of a global community, being a part of the world, viewing the world through the eyes of just a human being, not being black, not being white, not being Jewish, Asian. It's just being a part of the, how can I say, under the flag of being a human being, a person that's a part of the world. Portal life, we came up with the saying that when you step inside of a portal, it's not about your class or your color. It's just human beings trying to teach each other. That's what we need to do. I think we need to teach each other, to learn from Agnes, to learn the true stories about the Holocaust. Then I start to educate myself on what it's like to be a Jewish person, what facts I actually had wrong, to correct myself, to now understand that story, understand we all been through the same pain and we're all trying to get to the light. And I guess that's to achieve ultimate peace and unity amongst the world. So I think just conversations like this and being able to communicate without borders, people should lessen their news and do more intimate one-on-one building. And I think that's a great way to kind of heal the world, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Louis, and thank you. You know, on the dialogue point that you were making, I want to thank you for being so open to our questions because, you know, as a white person, I feel sometimes like it can be difficult and awkward to try to figure out, like, is it safe to ask my questions, or like, am I coming across as racist or something? So I appreciate you making that an intentional point that people can ask you those questions. And so, Agnes, I want to ask you your thoughts on how we can build bridges across culture.
First of all, I want to tell Louis that I completely identified with him. We may be a different color, but our sufferings have been so similar.
Yes.
Except mine, I mean, anti-Semitism is once again very much on the rise all over the world, including the United States, and it scares me terribly. I have always been so grateful that my children were American citizens, and I still believe that with all our problems, this is the best place in the world to live. And I've lived in this apartment for about 40 years, and I live in Skokie, Illinois. This building was 99% Jewish when I moved in here. And little by little, the people died or moved to the Sun Belt. But now we have the United Nations. And you seldom hear anybody speak English, and that bothers me. But aside from that, we all get along very nicely. Nobody asks you your religion, your ethnicity, and we're all cordial to each other. I don't know anybody by name anymore like I used to, but that reflects on me getting older and not remembering. So, and as far as bridges go, forums like this and my speaking out to young people will build bridges. And I truly believe that Melissa's generation will not stand for the oppression the older generation stood for. And they will enlighten the world and take it to a higher place where there is more understanding and more intermingling and less finger pointing.
Thank you, Agnes, and no pressure, Melissa. Okay.
Not just Melissa, it's her entire generation. I
all
have
of
watched all these young people demonstrating, black and white together, and I was so proud of them. I wish that I was 20 years old again and I could have gone and demonstrated with them.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Agnes. And I was just being facetious. And, you know, this generation, these younger generations surely benefit from the time and love that you have invested in them. So thank you for sharing your message that they will carry forward in that mission. So we've got a ton of really good questions. I want to try as much as possible to do this like kind of, you know, quick, rapid fire kinds of answers if we can, but if it's not, that's okay too. We'll just schedule more time to talk. So Lewis, question coming in is, what did you see, hear, and experience in the protests and rioting after the murder of George Floyd?
Well, I saw, to be honest, a lot of chaos, a lot of anger, but I also saw a lot of unity at the same time. I saw a lot of people being awoke. A lot of people who normally wouldn't care, I start to see the people who even didn't care start to emerge and start to care. Unfortunately, I do hate that the violence kind of escalated, but I do understand the anger, and in a way I kind of understand the violence. But it still don't need to, for people to kind of destroy the community. It's already in a bad condition, so that's kind of something I didn't agree with. But for the first time in my life, even though it was people angry, I could truly say I was kind of happy to see that people came together. I just hate it took for another person, and I stress that, another African American person to lose their life to law enforcement. For people to finally come together and take a stand, that's the only thing I regret, that somebody had to lose their life. But I saw so many people come together, and what really touched me was, for the first time in a long time, you really saw the young people and the elders march hand in hand and for this cause and share something in common and really want to bring change. Even though I think we have so far to go, I believe we're really at the verge of actually seeing something actually happen, to where, I don't want to say maybe I should say reparations, but in a different way. I don't mean like the 40 acres or the mule. I just think just people being treated fairly. I think that's all African American people want, especially me growing up around so much racism and being discriminated on in so many ways. I just think it's a dream of mine and so many others, and Dr. King, just the day that we can finally just be equal when it comes to everything. And that goes for like equal housing, equal opportunity to own a home, equal opportunity to go to the best schools, colleges, not be discriminated on, just simple things in life. I know my biggest dream and the thing I've been really, really, really trying to do in my life is just have a simple family life and leave a great legacy behind it. What I mean by that, my dream is to buy my mother a home. I know she always wanted a home, and I've been doing that. And it's just so she could feel in her lifetime that she wasn't cheated because she was African American, that she didn't ever get the opportunity. I can speak that growing up in low income most of your life, it has an effect on you. And I know even though my mom is doing great right now and has a great life and is a great woman, I know deep down she don't feel accomplished because she never got to just live that simple American dream, like own a home or take us all on vacation or things like that. So I live to do that for her.
Appreciate that. I join you in that dream, Lewis. We're rooting for you, man. So, Agnes, to you, what about your feelings toward the Hungarian people then and now? How they could turn from being proud and civilized people to being complicit in the murder of hundreds of thousands of their citizens? And how do you feel toward Hungary and Hungarian people today?
Wow. Well, Hungarian people, from the time I can, what I have read, because it's not what I remember, because I was a child when all this happened, but they've always been anti-Semitic. And my mother's two sisters wanted us to immigrate long before we did. And my father's mantra was always, Jews have never had it so good in Hungary, but they were always second-class citizens in Hungary. And we don't want to go anywhere. We got a well-going business anyhow. And my parents woke up too late to realities. And finally, they did start an immigration process around 1942. And by that time, we had all our papers except our visa to go through Germany, and the Germans wouldn't give us our visa. Otherwise, my life would have been very different. I have some dear Hungarian friends who are Gentiles. Well, first of all, my darling Julia, who's long passed, who risked her life to save mine. But Hungary, unfortunately, is still very anti-Semitic. It has a very anti-Semitic government. As a matter of fact, the Jewish Federation for a while said that it was the most anti-Semitic European country. And I am glad to be away from there. My father returned and remarried, and I never knew the lady he married. She had two children. Her husband died in the Holocaust also. And you can imagine how hard that was for me as a teenager to know that my daddy had another little girl to hug. And she happened to have been my age. So that posed another very, very big problem for me. Yeah. But
go ahead.
To refer back to Lewis, the looters, the people who broke store windows and took merchandise, they were thugs. They were not part of this demonstration. They just worked themselves into this. And I have no use for them at all. However, the people who stood up for the right to demonstrate, I'm very much with.
Lewis, let's talk about that again for a second, because Danny reminded me of something that you told us once in the portal, which is that you have been shot multiple times, right, with bullets, and you have said that that is something of, it can be regarded as like a badge of honor in places like the Amani neighborhood. So, you know, when Agnes is talking about people who you know, participate in looting or rioting or something like that, tell us a little bit more not that you have to speak for people who do that, but like, what are some of the elements of perception and living in hardship in your community that, like, why do you think people participate in those things? Why do you think people see it as a badge of honor to be shot and so forth?
Well, it's just like a two-headed monster with that question. It's like it becomes a badge of honor because it almost got to happen in your lifetime. It's like graduating to manhood, if I would like to say. Like, you almost got to have like a one encounter with the police, or at least been in prison at least one time, or been shot, or been in a gang, or participated in some type of violent act, because it's just the norm of the neighborhood now. So it becomes like, I say, like a rite of passage almost, because you expect it to happen, if you get what I mean. Like, we always knew when we was younger, as young as me, as young as like 9 years, I always knew I would have an encounter with the police in my lifetime. I always knew I would have to see a jail cell. And I always knew it was a possibility that I would get shot, or somebody in my family would die to gun violence. It's like something you almost accept when you're young. So that's kind of what I meant by it becoming a rite of passage. I hate to say it, but you almost become immune to the lifestyle. It's like if it don't happen, something ain't right, even though that's kind of how they program you. So, but as far as the looting, and kind of understanding a little more, it's like Agnes said, I don't agree. Some of those people are thugs. Some people are just wanting to just cause havoc, tear things up, do all the things for the wrong reasons, protest, to destroy a peaceful protest or people trying to bring peaceful change. However, there's another side to the looting that I also understand, being African American. That's just like not having the resources. So many people that live in the neighborhood who don't have anything, who saw this as opportunity to finally get something they can own, something that they can have nice, when people don't get nice. Still, no excuse for the looting, but a lot of people are looting because they didn't have a lot of things. You'll be surprised how many people are on the verge of, how can I say, about to lose their house because they can't pay rent, because a lot of people have been laid off due to the COVID. A lot of people didn't get a lot of stimulus money down in the inner city. I know they said it was like $2 trillion, but hey, please believe it when I tell you, a lot of people didn't get to feel that where I'm from. And then what you have is just an anger. And then that anger turned into people start feeling like they don't own anything, they don't have anything, and here was their chance to get something. Again, not saying looting is okay, but I always thought it was two sides. You have people who really want to destroy peaceful movement, and you have people who just out there because they're the have-nots. They don't have enough. They're not eating. You'd be surprised how many kids I have to feed every day killed because their mom's laid off. Like, we got an overload. Luckily, we were able to move to the church, our new site, and we've been getting it up because we're running out of room in this house. And feeding kids has become like a daily thing almost. So just the not having enough. Like, we don't have enough, but we share what we have. But again, what I say, and just I think there's the people just a need for things they don't have contributes to part of the looting, along with the thugs and people that just want to destroy things. So that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, and Louis, you and I had talked a couple months back about the stimulus checks. You referenced this, and one of the things that I didn't realize about the stimulus checks is that when you owe child support, you are not eligible for that stimulus check.
Yeah.
And when you're incarcerated, you continue to accrue liabilities for child support, and then you get out and you can't get a job because you have a conviction on your record. So you can't pay the child support, so you can't get the stimulus check.
Yeah.
So our efforts to help people out are exacerbating the disparities. But Louis, you know, Agnes and I were both moved by meeting a young man named Trey in the portal.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I'll
Trey,
never forget him.
yeah, I think he was maybe 17 or 18 years old, and he had a daughter on the way. And
Yeah.
he told us that, you know, young men, and correct me if I'm misquoting him, but young men in the Amani neighborhood have the feeling that they are either going to be dead or incarcerated by the age of 18, 19, 20 years old. Therefore, their life will be over. And so they want to see some way of their legacy living on, which is, you know, through children for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so Trey, tell us what success would look like in your neighborhood for young men like Trey. What is the goal? What is the dream for young men in your neighborhood?
Well, the dream for our young men, believe it or not, is, I hate to say it, as I surround myself with young people, they just want to live a decent life, a life where they can provide for their families, a life where they don't really have to do any hustling, any crime, make an honest living. It's hard kind of talking the kids into going the right route when you can't provide for your family, or when you can't go to school because you don't have decent clothing, or you feel embarrassed, or you can't earn a decent enough wage to provide for your family. Many of the young men in our neighborhood have to become men early because of the mass incarceration thing, because of the single parent household thing. So I think mainly they just want to be great providers, just be proud to say that they can take care of their own, take care of their family. So I think you have so many young people taking chances and being, how can I say, the sacrificial lamb for their family. Like, I can speak for myself, as when I was young, man, I always felt, me being the oldest in my family, I had to be the sacrificial lamb. I had to go out there and take all the scrapes and the bumps and bruises for my family, because somebody had to be that backbone, because my dad wasn't there. I grew up in a single parent household, and it was tough for my mom being a teen parent with so many children. So that forced us to grow up faster. And I think so many young people in my neighborhood, really speaking, they just wanted to live a better life. And that means, like I said, simple things: owning a home, having a job that you're proud of, a job that you can face your family. I know this was definitely one of the problems I had. Just how do you face your family when you have nothing to show? You haven't really accomplished nothing. You really don't own anything. These are some of the things that make it tough growing up in the inner city.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Louis. Agnes, a question for you. Are you religious?
No, I am not. I love my people. I care about my people. Israel must live forever. But as far as being a religious Jew, I am not. Unfortunately, the Holocaust made me ask myself the question, where was God when all these people perished? Everybody who loved me except my father died in the Holocaust. And I have never made totally peace with that.
Thank you for answering that question. And for both of you, this is a question from Alex, who asks, both of you have experienced firsthand violence that is perpetrated by those in power, state violence, we might say. What are your thoughts on calls to, quote, defund the police? Is that the right path forward to address police violence against Black folks and move our society toward anti-racist policies? So, Louis, why don't you go first on that one, if you're willing?
Well, with the defund the police, I kind of believe we should defund the police until we get better police, and then we should fund. I think we need to do a lot of breaking down the police. I think we should do a lot of firing and rehiring. And what I mean by that is, I think they should look more for, if we do have to have law enforcement, like I said, more law enforcement that comes from the cities, the districts they get to patrol. They should have to live in the districts. I think they can understand and be better judge of characters when certain crimes are being committed, or how to approach certain people when certain things are happening in the neighborhood. I believe we should get a lot of more, how can I say, social worker type people involved, plus like mental health services, because I believe a lot of people do have mental things that they may be going through that law enforcement might not understand. So I think they should spend a lot of funding, kind of focusing on that, getting people mental services. I believe that, yeah, defunding the police until certain things and certain measures are met is probably a good idea in my eyes.
Thank you, Louis. And Agnes, your thoughts on the same question?
I don't know if defunding the police would cure this problem, because we need some kind of police network. And to start from the basics and to rebuild it, well, what are we going to do in the meantime? I think you have to educate the police. And yes, I agree with Louis about bringing in some kind of social service to educate them what they can do and what they can't do. And they should be held liable when they purposely hurt people. There's no question about that.
Okay.
But don't forget, on the other side of that is that they're risking their lives, and they have to make split-second decisions to whether to shoot or not. And no, it is not all right to shoot somebody in the back when they're walking away from you. But there may be instances when it either the shooter shoots you or you shoot the shooter. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more questions, but I'm going to take a timeout right here and turn it over to Melissa for final housekeeping announcements and anything else you might want to say, Melissa.
Cool. Well, first off, just as a representative of the Next Gen, I want to thank you for being here to everyone. We are just so honored that we can be here with all of you, asking these hard questions and listening to Agnes and Louis just share so much insight that they have. Danny just said too in the chat, for people who are not following the chat, any questions that have not been answered, we will send a follow-up email because you all registered with your email. So we can send a follow-up email to all of you answering the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer. But we'll still stick around and get through as many as we can right now. But just thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, so, and if people have to sign out, that's totally fine. You're not going to hurt our feelings. We'll just keep rolling for a little bit, but we won't go too much longer. That's what I'm thinking. Now, Louis, Jim Schuster is following up the question on the where was God issue. And he said, do you look at what has been done to Black people and ask that same question, where was God?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely. I really, that statement kind of really stuck out to me that actually says that. Because when I was younger, I really used to think God hated Black people. Like, I thought, like, we were the cursed people. Like, how could all this happen if God cared anything about people? Like, how could you go 400 years of just discrimination, police brutality, disenfranchisement? How could you, people that you care about so much and created, go through this? How could you send us through this? How could my mother's mother, her mother, and now me, now my children go through all of this, and still nothing has been done, and we still so far away from curing the problem? I often used to question if there is a God, does God hate us? And then I started to view world different, because even though I have my downs, I also have my ups. And so even though I'm not a real religious person, I have a different outlook on what God is. And to me, I just think God in my eyes is anything that's good, anything that's pure, anything that brings a smile on your face. That's how I view God. I really don't think, I believe all the things that you hear about, the stories in the Bible and God, and a lot of it has to do with the things that I've been through growing up as a Black man in America, and the things that my family went through. It's like we always got the rough end of the deal, and it seemed like it would never stop. So sometimes I do question if there is a God.
Thank you, Louis. Appreciate that. And our guy, Aiden from Montana, whom you met, Louis, and whom you met, Agnes, he's asking, how does storytelling have a role in combating systemic oppression and or prejudice. And if I could, Aiden, I'd like to expand your question, not just storytelling, but Louis, I know you are into poetry, you're into music, you do some apparel, some entrepreneurial things. How can storytelling and the arts have a role in combating systemic oppression and or prejudice? So Louis, let's start with you.
Well, I think storytelling helps because it helps you learn not only the life lessons, but the mistakes and the different triumphs and ways to navigate through life. I think hearing stories of the Holocaust or like the stories my mom used to tell me about the civil rights movement back in the day help us to navigate through the times that we have now and give us a better idea of how to tackle things that's going on today. It's like I shared earlier, I kind of view our elders as time machines. They say time machines don't exist, but I think they exist through our elders because they get to tell those stories and life lessons that gives us a better idea of how to navigate through life. So, smiles.
Appreciate that. Agnes, what do you think about storytelling in the arts?
Storytelling, well, first of all, I think that speaking out is very important, and I have read lots and lots of books, and they have enlightened me tremendously. Most of them are fiction, but they're intertwined with history. And the music of young people definitely reflects social justice. And the rap artists, and I admire them. I am, unfortunately for my parents who wanted me to be a musician and play the piano, I've always had a tin ear. So, but I love plays regarding social issues or movies. You know, the first movie I saw in the United States was Gentleman's Agreement. Now, I don't know if any of you were old enough to ever see that, but it was about a reporter who went undercover as a Jew and went to a resort where it said Jews and dogs not allowed. And I don't really remember the details of the story at this point, but it just hit home to me as an immigrant who came from that world, how could this happen in America? And we've come a long ways since I've been here, because my husband and I, when we were newlyweds, we moved to Houston, and there were the black water fountains and the white water fountains, and the black bathrooms and the white bathrooms, and I was appalled because I always thought this was the land of the free, and how could this be? And my husband was an electronic technician, and we opened a little shop, and we employed a very nice, clean-cut young black man who was an excellent technician. And our white neighbors went to the landlord complaining that they don't want to share the bathroom with a black man. And this was one of the many things that made us move back to Illinois. Mm. So yeah. I was absolutely appalled by all that.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that, Agnes. So this is an issue that has risen to the surface here in this past week with influential athletes, artists, entertainers. I'm thinking of Nick Cannon. I'm thinking of Deshaun Jackson and Ice Cube, all very influential Black people who have made public statements which are anti-Semitic. And so the question is, Louis, and maybe Agnes, we can hear from you on this too. Louis, what is your sense of, not that you have to speak for all Black people, but where can you see that coming from? I mean, what is your view of it in your neighborhood? Do you think that perception that you grew up with about Jewish people is still there among young people, or how do we counteract that?
I think it's there because it's like Agnes said, the proper education isn't there. you don't know. Like, even when we go to school, like when they teach us history, they don't give us the proper history lesson that we need, the proper knowledge that we need to know about these different cultures. So you have people who's, how can I say, undereducated and don't have the truth and been taught a lie about the way the world is all their life, how can I say, saying things that may be inappropriate. I think it just comes from a lack of not knowledge, not being able to experience being in a room full of Jewish people or a room full of Asian people or black people, for instance, not being able to mingle amongst, see what the culture really like. And so you have so many people who, how can I say, like to talk the talk but never walk the walk. I always ask people, I think one of the cures to kind of fixing this problem is, and I like to ask people this, how diverse is your life outside of work? Like, besides going to work, how often do you interact with different races? Besides, like, in your personal life, many people like to say they're not racist or they don't, they don't dislike black people or Jewish people, but that's only because they work with them. What about after your life? Do you have any African American friends that come over your house? Do you have dinner? Do you have any Jewish friends that come by and stop and visit you? I think it's just a matter of people bringing more diversity to their life and educating themselves more about culture, history, and religion, and not, like I said earlier, being afraid to go to one of the elders like Agnes and ask those tough questions about life and actually give her an opportunity to give you the real answers about these issues that plague us all.
Thank you, Louis. Agnes, do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah,
please.
I sure do. Nobody is born with prejudice. It's taught, and it begins in the home. And I've always taught my children that Jewish people have no right to be prejudiced against anybody because we have been attacked by prejudice during our life. And I can't understand why Black people would be prejudiced when their lives in many ways ran a similar course, except unfortunately they were taught that when they were very, very young.
Yes.
And they carried that prejudice with them. So once more, I go back to education. Education is the key to that also.
Yes.
When I speak to a group of teenagers, I always tell them, if you meet somebody who doesn't look like you, don't decide whether you like them or not. Get to know them, and then it's up to you. You don't have to be friends with everybody. They're good and bad and every kind. But at least give them the opportunity of getting to know them.
Thank you, Agnes. I appreciate that. And certainly, that prejudice street goes both ways, because I know in my own experience growing up how racist white people can be toward Black people. And so we all have to answer to our own communities, and we all have responsibility to educate ourselves. So I want to thank both of you. I think that we have cleared out the question queue. So this is a last call for anything that Agnes or Louis you would like to leave us with.
I am going to quote my friend Magda, who would always tell kids, above all, don't hate. You can dislike somebody, but hate is a very treacherous emotion, and it comes back to eat you up alive. So don't hate.
I appreciate that, and thank you for channeling Magda Brown too. Love having her as part of the conversation. Louis, what do you think? Any final things you want to say for us?
I just wanted to say thank you for having me here. Like I said, it's always a pleasure to share knowledge and hear Agnes speak and share wisdom. I really appreciate you, Agnes. You have definitely made an impact on my life, and every time I get to sit down and chat with you, I'm forever changed. I also just want to say we should do more things like this. I think this is the key to just really, like I said, overcoming the differences, the stereotypes, the discrimination, just educating each other properly on culture. And I just like to say, let's start viewing each other as just human beings. It's not about even race. It's just about we both bleed the same blood. We both go through the same traumas and pains. So that makes us alike. So I think we should just walk under the flag of just being human beings.
Hear, hear. I appreciate both of you. I know everybody, we can see it in the chat. People are leaving their gratitude for you, Agnes, and you, Louis, and we appreciate you so much. Melissa, Spungen Family Foundation, Next Generation, we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, David, for keeping us rolling here. We'll be able to share out the recording after this, and we've got everybody's email addresses. We can share resources and so forth. So thank you both for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. And we are going to shut it down here. Thanks. Have a good evening.
I hope we can do this again.
Peace.